If you're passionate about this business, you can learn anything. You can pretty much figure out anything. Clients can think they deserve one thing, and yet that's not what the market will bear. We're all not in it just for the money. I'm sure that with the movies and the press, it may seem that way almost 100% of the time. I think the greatest thing about technology is usually where it's a threat for others, it's usually helpful for me. Todd Fasanella, Ohio State class of 1993, and I've had many jobs and positions. Currently a CEO position at a lender that finances primarily timeshare companies. When they sell goods to their customers, their product to their customer, we finance them. And then I also work as a managing director in a real estate brokerage that, unlike many, which helps people buy and sell homes or buys and sells commercial properties, we mostly raise capital for developers who are building or buying properties. And then I also have an investor business where we're looking to invest in several types of businesses, and that's with some partners. Also recently joined a broker-dealer, similar to what I did in the past, for investment banking for all different kinds of transactions, still primarily focused on financial services and on hospitality and real estate. I'll typically line up phone calls related to transactions that are either already going on or a potential new transaction to diligence it out a little bit. Maybe they've sent me some information that I'm reviewing, but I have lots of questions. Other things, travel is frequent, typically anywhere from 1 to 3 days a week, depending on the week. Last week it was only 1. This week I think it's going to be none. The following week it could be 3 or 4 days that week. So that relates similarly to existing transactions where you're maybe in an acquisition situation or joint venture situation and you're trying to get the parties together to agree upon terms. That's where I was Friday. It was a letter of intent among my client who has something that they need both a operating and joint venture development partner as well as money for. And this potential partner that's working with them has all of those things. Or at least can bring all of those resources. So we were, for 3 hours, investigating each other's wants and needs and trying to come up with a framework around that for an agreement. So that's a typical day's work. Mostly working with the people who are my clients are typically friends. Didn't start out that way. Of course, when I was young and new in the business, my clients were whoever my boss's clients were. And you're not necessarily going to like all of them or get along with all of them, but you have to do the business and do the work. So you're helping other people raise capital to buy or build something, ultimately to realize their dreams at the end of the day. And if that doesn't inspire you to some degree, particularly when you look at the resilience of our clients, I could say from the old days, when I was covering more larger corporates, it's a little different, but now I cover a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of others who are self-made people or left big organizations to go and pursue their own businesses. And in those situations, if you don't love really trying to help them, this is probably not going to be the business for you. Managing expectations. Clients can think they deserve one thing, and yet that's not what the market will bear in a given environment. So managing expectations is probably the hardest part of the job. It's kind of like dating. It's a matching game. You have to find investors who not only want the same risk-return profile, but there are many other characteristics, the type of assets they are, where they're located, how old they are or new they are. All of those things are attributes that an investor will have in their criteria of what they're willing to finance and then at what level of leverage they're willing to finance. So we couldn't quite match that up across the entire capital structure on this one. Like I said, it fell a little short at the very end, and our client did have some other ways that he expected would potentially bring that capital to the transaction from his company's side, relied upon selling some other properties which they weren't able to do in the time frame. I think one of them is probably that we're all not in it just for the money. I'm sure that with the movies and the press, it may seem that way almost 100% of the time. I don't think anybody's ever in anything only for the money. Because if you were, you die at 55 years old and then you leave it to who? So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And And you will find a lot of people, maybe I shouldn't say a lot, but you will find some people that is a true story. And that's exactly what happens. This is a highly stressful business. If you're just in this to make the money, the reality is there's lots of unintended consequences to that as a pure pursuit goal as well. Plus, it's hard to work within a team environment where the only goal that you're measured against is how much money either you or your group is making. It has to be done in a way that makes sense, and it has to be done in a way that you're serving clients so that you can attract more clients in the future. I've certainly seen a lot of things that were done just for a banker to earn a buck, and you'd almost think that they were quitting their job the next week because they'll never have many clients after the rest of Wall Street hears what they've done. To lie to a client to get them to do a certain transaction or to finish a certain transaction a certain way. And you see some of these things and, again, you realize doing this only for the money is not going to get you very far. I think a good mix of hard accounting, finance, statistics. Now they've invented coursework in data science, which you kind of had to learn that on your own in the past. I would say if you're going to take more of anything, take more of that. Because it's a combination of theory and applied. It really does apply the theory to real world problems right away. I think in an investment banking type or a capital raising or a finance profession that's in a service organization like this as opposed to inside a company, those softer skills are also very important. Take a psychology class, take a sociology class, understand people, what motivates them. Because it also helps you to manage your clients' expectations. I think a lot of times it just comes down to liking what you're doing more than anything else. There's certainly people around me in all these organizations that I've worked or currently work that I can tell are not really that passionate about what we're doing. If you're passionate about this business, you can learn anything. You can pretty much figure out anything. How to deal with people, how to work in teams. One of the things that I wish I would have known earlier in my career is attach yourself to functionable teams that are highly developed. While you might think that there's less opportunity in a highly developed, well-oiled machine team, the reality is there's always room for you, and typically if they're bringing you into it, they know what role you're going to play and what gap you're going to fill. And then you throw in complementing that with having some mentors from time to time. In the large organization, coming out of college, you would start as an analyst for a couple of years. Then they usually expect you to go off to business school. In the old days, they didn't expect you necessarily to go off to business school. It was an option, but you didn't have to. And either way, if you were deemed good enough, they would promote you to an associate. Otherwise, when you come out of business school, you typically start as an associate, which means effectively someone who's got experience, even though it may not be in this particular industry or business. And that maturity garners you a higher level position, both in terms of responsibility and in terms of compensation. And then from there, every 3 to 4 years, there's a different title that basically carries more responsibility. In the investment banking world, you could characterize all of them by more money and taking on more responsibility for transactions at the same time, which means not only managing more clients and more deals, but also managing more people. So you'll have slightly different roles in each of those positions. The kind of mid-level is a vice president in investment banking. Sometimes it's called other titles elsewhere, executive director or something like that. But the VP and director level positions, you're typically managing transactions. You're not doing every little thing that needs to be done to progress a transaction along. Maybe you're not hands in the financial model every day any longer. That could be the analysts and associates primarily. But you're supervising the timeline and processes that need to happen. And starting to look out for things that your bosses educate you on, or people that are more senior on your team, I should say, because they may not always be your boss, that you garner from their experiences. Both positive and negative things to look out for in the path of a transaction process. So usually a managing director is one of the top spots, I'd say, unless you go into some executive management position within the firm or head of a group or a head of investment banking or something like that. And a managing director position, I'd simply characterize it as you're going to go find new clients and new business. That's your main job. And all the rest of the team has to be organized to be able to support you to do that. Not only in getting the new business, but in being able to handle it once you have it. technology is probably the greatest change, and in some sense they provide competition, and in other ways they complement what we're doing. I think the greatest thing about technology is usually where it's a threat for others, it's usually helpful for me. And I say that because it's easy to, in some ways, go through the banking environment and do your job well, but not create a niche for yourself. And there's a lot of people that don't create a niche for themselves. And as a result, they really rely more on the institution in some ways than the institution is relying upon them as an individual. And in that situation, I think technology can hurt you because it can disintermediate the value you provide. But if the value you provide is built up around certain experiences that really do differentiate you from a lot of the others in the industry, then technology usually becomes your friend. Because if that technology is created to find investors for me or our clients, or find clients for my clients to buy, which is something I would have to help them do in the past, I don't necessarily look at that as a bad thing. Yes, most of them aren't truly working by yourself. You typically still need a team for a whole host of reasons. One, you can't take on a lot of transactions, more than 2 or 3 if you're doing it by yourself, because you have to do everything, and there is a lot involved in these types of transactions. And really you also have to do it in such a way where you're really a consultant. You can't go and do the investment banking business truly on your own. Our regulatory environment doesn't really allow you to do that. I had never wanted to work in finance ever, up until the point where I was in the PhD program. And even in a PhD program in economics, you're really not learning finance. But one of my second year classmates at the time, where you're taking more of your specialties beyond your foundational coursework, was taking through the business school the finance specialty. And I think he was taking a little bit of a capital markets overview course, and it had described securitization. And when he described it to me, I could just tell that this was something that I needed to be involved in. You could use your quantitative skill set, which is something that I thought that I was naturally good at and interested in, and use that to satisfy both a client's needs as well as investors' needs. I always say curing cancer, I think. Not that me personally can solve it, but I would love to contribute to that. It has nothing to do with my investment banking career necessarily. Although I say necessarily, and yet there are technologies from time to time that look for financing, one of which I can't say I'm actively involved yet, but may get actively involved soon. So that's one possibility within my career skill set. But also just because math is one of my hobbies, I do think a mathematician is much more likely to solve cancer than a medical doctor, particularly with where we've been going with understanding, as I say, how things move around in the body and how they work. Oh, that's a long list. I wish it was one person, but I can't say it is. For some of those different times that I mentioned there were big changes, there were people involved that I consulted, talked to, befriended. Particularly in 2005, there was one person in particular who had, at that point, recently left the organization, happened to go to the same business school I went to, but was much more senior and older than I was and wiser, experienced. So I went to him, sought him out, and kind of laid out the deck of cards the way I was seeing it. He agreed with the vision that I had, which was interesting in of itself, because like I said, not everybody was talking about kind of what I saw. And he gave me kind of his assessment or view on what he thought I should do, given what I thought my options were. At the time, that resulted in me staying at the firm, just moving groups as opposed to going outside the firm into the corporate investment banking role. I think for a whole lot of reasons that helped a lot. And I'm not sure where my investment banking career would be today if it probably wasn't for that advice, especially given what happened 2 years later with the entire financial world falling off a bit of a cliff.
What's your favorite thing to do in your free time?
Spend time with my family.
One thing you cannot live without?
My family and friends.
What's your most favorite book or movie?
I guess I'd have to say one that was written by my client called Do Not Disturb, Lawrence Geller.
Best advice that you received?
Follow your gut instincts.
What makes you sad?
Not having enough time.
What makes you happy?
Spending the time that I do with family, friends, clients outside of the workplace.
Repeat and finish the sentence. You should get into my profession if you are...
Ultimately passionate about it.
You should not get into my profession if you are...
Well, there's a whole host of qualities I guess I could list off. Probably the biggest being if you're not a very organized person or can at least focus and organize yourself. That's probably a big piece of it. Well, I think I always told myself to follow through on what you're really interested in. A lot of people listen to a lot of other people, constituents, family, etc., to go do things, and people do them and they're not happy. So just as I told my daughter, who is a budding cartoonist and animator, don't worry about the money, just go do it. Because she's passionate about it, the money will follow.